My name is Margaret Collins, and I'm 59 years old. I've spent nearly 2 decades as an office manager at Caldwell Walker Law in Oregon, a quiet job in a quiet town. I'm a widow and a mother of 2. Emily, my 32-year-old daughter, and Luke, my son, who's 29. I've worked my whole life to make sure they never had to struggle the way I did after their father died. Last Tuesday, I received an email from Emily with no subject line, just her name. I opened it expecting an update about her wedding, maybe a sweet note. But instead, I read words that quietly shattered me. She told me to watch her wedding online instead of attending in person. I didn't cry that morning. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the steam curling from my coffee mug until it disappeared into the stale Oregon air. Outside, the street was waking up sprinklers ticking across manicured lawns, delivery trucks rumbling past a dog, barking at nothing. The world moved forward indifferent to the silent earthquake that had split me open from the inside. Emily's words looped in my mind, each syllable, a blade slicing into soft flesh. If you want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Meet link we've created. Should be just like being there. LOL. LOL. 3 letters that turned a mother into an inconvenience, a guest to be managed, a transaction to be settled. I thought about the $30,000 I'd already wired for her venue deposit, the extra $50,000 I was planning to send that week for catering and floral arrangements. Money scraped together from my retirement funds, the house refinancing the life I'd planned for later. I used to believe there would be time for me later. Later when Emily was settled. Later when Luke had his house. Later when no one needed me so desperately. Later never came. It dissolved into the mornings I woke up at 5 a.m. to pack their lunches, the nights I fell asleep over unpaid bills, the years I swallowed loneliness like bitter medicine. And now my reward was a live stream link to my daughter's wedding. On the drive to work, fog rolled off the coastal hills, swallowing the road in slow gray waves. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I couldn't stop the memories from bleeding through the fog. Emily at 5, clutching a stuffed bunny with one ear chewed, ragged. "Mommy, will you always come to my birthday?" she asked, eyes wide with sleepy trust. Emily at 13 curled in my lap after a nightmare about losing me. Emily at 27 crying in a New York apartment that smelled of stale takeout and regret as I brewed her chamomile tea and told her heartbreak would not kill her, even though it felt like it would. I was there for every terror, every triumph, every moment that broke her and rebuilt her. And now I was told to stay home as if I was an old coat to be hung in the back of the closet. At the office, Robert set a latte on my desk. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, my daughter has cut me out of her life, and I think it's my fault because I loved her so much that I forgot to teach her how to love me back. But I didn't. I only smiled and said, "Didn't sleep well," because what else is there to say when your world ends, but the sun still rises and your inbox still fills with urgent flagged emails about copy paper orders and deposition schedules? By lunch, Emily's texts arrived. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk. This isn't funny." Funny? The word tasted like iron in my mouth. Had she ever known me at all? Known the quiet dignity I carried, the pride that refused to beg for a place in her life? I turned off my phone and sipped the latte Robert had brought me. For the first time in my life, I let the silence answer for me. That evening, after canceling the $50,000 wire transfer at First Federal Bank, I drove home under a sky streaked with lavender and ash. Spring in Oregon is always cruel. Cold winds rattling pink blossoms from trees like confetti at a funeral. In my kitchen, I uncorked a bottle of Pinot Noir I'd saved for Thanksgiving, the one Emily had canceled last minute. Work, she'd said. I poured a glass and walked to the porch, settling into the old wicker chair that creaked under my weight. The sunset bled orange into the horizon. Birds argued in the birch trees lining the street. A neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. The world felt distant, as if I was watching it from behind thick glass. I thought of all the birthdays I spent alone, all the holidays where I pretended to be too busy to notice the silence, all the quiet sacrifices no one saw, the shoes never bought, the vacations postponed, the hair appointments missed so college deposits could clear on time, all the ways I erased myself so they could feel whole. And it struck me with devastating clarity. They never asked me to be a person, only a mother, only a wallet, only a silent pillar holding up their lives. At 9 p.m. the doorbell rang. I opened it to Luke, still in his office clothes. Tie-loosened hair ruffled like he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. "Mom," he said sharply, stepping inside. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Emily's freaking out." "Hello to you too," I replied, walking back to my wine glass. He followed me to the kitchen. "She says you're not coming to the wedding, that you're being difficult." I laughed, a sound that startled even me. Difficult? For not attending a wedding I was uninvited from. "Andrew's parents are paying for most of it," he snapped. "You know how traditional they are." I raised an eyebrow. "Traditional? Luke, I already paid $30,000. I was about to send another $50,000. That's not tradition. That's a business transaction." He blinked, stunned. "Wait, you were sending another 50? Was I said evenly, sipping my wine? "Not anymore. Mom, they're counting on that. The venue, the caterer. Not my problem anymore." I interrupted, my voice soft, but steel-edged, his face twisted. "Of course it's your problem. She's your daughter. And I am her mother?" I said quietly. "A mother who was told to stay home and watch from a screen." He opened his mouth, closed it, then exploded. "You always make everything about yourself." And something inside me, something old and bruised and long-suffering, finally snapped. "Get out of my house, Luke. What, you heard me. Get out, Mom." I met his eyes with a calm he couldn't penetrate. "I have given everything I had. I am done being the villain in a story I wrote with love." He stood there a moment longer, stunned. Then he turned and left. The door clicked shut behind him, quiet as a sigh, but it felt louder than any slam. I stood in my kitchen, heart pounding, waiting for guilt to swallow me whole. It never came. Instead, I felt a strange, exhilarating lightness spread through my chest like dawn. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't angry. I was free. The next morning, the sun rose pale over Oregon, lighting my kitchen in quiet gold. I sat at the table, cradling my mug of coffee, watching dust motes swirl in the beams of light like tiny ghosts. 43 missed calls from Emily, 3 voicemails from Luke. I didn't listen to any of them. Not yet. I sipped my coffee slowly, feeling the heat spread through my chest, anchoring me to this small moment of peace. For the first time in my life, no one owned my dawn but me. Around noon, an email arrived. Subject line, "Please don't ruin my wedding." I opened it without expectation. "Mom," she wrote, "I know you're upset about the Livestream thing, but this is extreme. We've lost the venue deposit, and if we don't pay the balance by end of day Paris time, the caterer walks. Andrew's parents are beyond upset. They say this proves you can't be reasoned with. Please don't do this. We can talk about you attending the ceremony, but we need the funds first." My eyes skimmed the words, noting every verb that reduced me to a means to an end. "We can talk about you attending, but we need the funds first." There it was. Not an apology, not remorse, just a negotiation. As if my worth could be bartered with my bank account balance. I closed the email and turned back to reviewing contracts at my desk. Robert stopped by suggesting lunch at the new Italian place. Normally I would decline polite, selfless, invisible. But something in me shifted. I'd like that, I said. Over pasta, he told me about his grandkids, the way his granddaughter loved ladybugs, how his grandson refused naps but fell asleep mid-sentence on the carpet. His eyes glowed with a softness I realized I had never allowed myself to hope for in someone. At one point, he paused and looked at me gently. "Forgive me, Margaret, but you seem lighter today." For a heartbeat, tears burned hot behind my eyes, but I blinked them away, and I told him everything. The email, the wedding, the money, the silent heartbreak. When I finished, he didn't judge, didn't offer platitudes. He simply nodded and said, "Sometimes the hardest part of love is setting boundaries, especially with the people we've given the most to." He reached across the table, squeezing my hand briefly with quiet solidarity. "I think you did the right thing." That evening, as I drove home under a navy sky strewn with early stars, I felt something within me settle. A deep exhale I didn't know I'd been holding for decades. When I pulled into the driveway porch, lights flickering on, I noticed a figure sitting on my steps. As I got closer, her face came into focus. Sophia, Emily's best friend since 5th grade. She stood quickly as I approached, brushing invisible lint from her coat. "Mrs. Collins," she said softly, "I'm sorry to drop by like this." "It's fine," I replied, unlocking the door. "Would you like some tea?" In the kitchen, the kettle hummed between us as she stared at old family photos on the fridge. Sleepy-eyed kids holding birthday cakes, summer picnics by the lake, pieces of a life that once felt whole. Finally, I asked Emily sent you. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "She's a mess. They lost the venue. Andrew's parents are threatening to cancel everything. She knows she messed up. She just doesn't know how to fix it." I poured tea into 2 mugs, the steam rising between us like a veil. "Is that why you're here?" I asked. "To fix it, no." Her voice broke. "I'm here to ask, is there anything she can say or do to change your mind?" I paused, staring into the swirling amber liquid. Was there? Would an apology erase the way her words sliced open old wounds? Would a hug undo the years I spent shrinking myself into someone small enough to be overlooked? I looked up at Sophia, still young, still soft with hope. "No," I said quietly. "There isn't." She sagged, tears brimming. Not even if she apologizes, I handed her a mug, my hand steady. "Words are easy, Sophia, especially when people are desperate. But people who love you, they don't wait until you walk away to finally see you." Sophia nodded, eyes glistening. "I get it," she whispered. "Even if she doesn't." She hugged me softly before leaving. And I closed the door behind her with a quiet click that felt like closing a chapter of my life. That night I sat on the porch, tea cooling in my hands, and watched the stars burn cold and distant overhead. For the first time, I didn't feel like a mother. I didn't feel like a widow. I felt like a woman, a whole woman, one who chose herself. And in the silence, I whispered to the night, "If my love is negotiable, so is my sacrifice. I will not burn to keep you warm anymore." Weeks turned into months. Spring bled quietly into early summer, and Oregon's skies softened into a muted, gentle blue that stretched endlessly above the rooftops. Everywhere around me, the world kept spinning forward, people busy with errands and birthdays and graduations, never noticing that for me, everything had ended and been reborn in the same silent breath. Life carried on with its casual cruelty and quiet beauty, unconcerned that mine had shattered and healed in a single moment. Emily's wedding happened eventually. It was a small backyard ceremony, intimate, strung with fairy lights and folding chairs set out under the maple tree. Just a few relatives and Andrew's parents gathered there, their polite conversations mingling with the scent of fresh-cut grass and cheap rosé. I wasn't invited. This time I didn't ache with surprise or betrayal. I didn't need to be there. Luke called once to tell me his voice clipped and tight with disapproval, as if he was fulfilling an obligation rather than sharing joy. I only listened in silence, feeling the heavy fabric of his expectations slip from my shoulders like an old winter coat shrugged off at the door. One gray morning while coffee brewed in my quiet kitchen, an email arrived from Emily. It was long, emotional. Her words spilled over the screen, a half-formed apology woven through with justifications. She wrote about stress about Andrew's family and their demands about how you don't understand what it's like to plan a wedding under so much pressure. I read it once, eyes skimming over sentences that no longer held power to pierce me. The grief that would have choked me before was absent. In its place sat a calm certainty, a quiet knowing. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because for the first time in my life, silence felt like love. A fierce, gentle love I finally gave to myself. A love that did not require explanation or performance or permission. A love that whispered enough. That day I made a new rule for my life. If my presence was negotiable, so was my effort. I would no longer chase where I wasn't wanted, or pour my soul into cracked cups that refused to hold it. Each dawn greeted me with a quiet peace, a hushed promise that I no longer needed to brace myself for guilt-laced texts or urgent calls that erased my needs and worth. My mornings were slow and sacred. I began attending a pottery class at the community center, my hands learning the language of clay, how to shape softness into strength, how to center and mold until something beautiful emerged. A cup with a lip slightly uneven, a small bowl perfect for morning strawberries, a crooked vase that now sat proudly on my windowsill, catching the early sun. I started reading again, thick novels with curled pages that smelled of time and ink stories, with heroines who fought battles I did not need to win for them. In the evenings, I had dinner with friends who asked about my dreams instead of cataloging my sacrifices. We laughed over cheap wine, shared quiet griefs, and planned road trips that never needed to impress anyone. At work, Robert still brought me lattes just the way I liked them, strong hot with a swirl of cream. One bright Friday, he placed a small lavender plant on my desk, its roots wrapped in brown paper and tied with simple twine. "For your porch," he said, a shy smile lighting his face. "I thought it might like the morning sun as much as you do." That evening, I set the lavender on the porch rail and sat beside it as dusk settled over my quiet street. The air smelled of warm earth, rain-soaked pavement and blooming roses from the neighbor's yard. Somewhere down the block, wind chimes tinkled their silver notes, floating through the deepening blue like blessings. And as I sat there, feeling the soft pulse of life around me, I realized something profound I had spent decades burning myself to keep others warm, giving until my bones ached with emptiness. Now, for the first time, I sat in the cool evening, unburned, unburdened, and whole. Not angry, not broken, simply free. My life was small now, but in the most beautiful way. A steaming cup of tea in the early dawn, clay-streaked hands shaping a new vessel, a lavender plant blooming purple under the rising sun. No grand purpose or achievement beyond being here, being real, being holy and unapologetically me. And in that hushed violet twilight, I whispered into the quiet that wrapped around me like a gentle shawl. Sometimes the greatest love story isn't the one where someone else saves you. It's the one where you finally come home to yourself. Driving to the bank that afternoon, I felt something inside me shift, crystallizing into a cold, sharp clarity, like river water, locked beneath winter ice, silent but powerful. The sun flickered through the windshield, glancing off parked cars and storefront windows, but I barely noticed the bright, bustling world outside. My mind replayed that email over and over, each line scraping against my heart, like gravel beneath bare feet. I thought about how Emily hadn't called me Dear Mom, the way she used to when she was little, when her chubby hands would tug at my skirts in the kitchen, eyes wide with questions about the world, her voice soft with wonder and love. Back then, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every grilled cheese cut diagonally was met with gratitude and unconditional trust. Now her words read like a transaction memo sent to a corporate vendor. You can watch through the Google Meet link. Should be just like being there. LOL. Just like being there. As if my presence could be digitized, reduced to pixels, and muted applause. As if the decades I spent raising her, every early morning lunch packed, every fever cooled with trembling hands, every silent prayer whispered for her happiness, could now be replaced with a link and a half-hearted chuckle. And in that moment, sitting at a red light watching pedestrians hurry across the intersection, I realized a truth so brutal it almost took my breath away. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was her wallet, a funding source, a convenience, an obligation to hide away when she wanted her life to look neat and unburdened by the woman who sacrificed everything for her comfort. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of First Federal Bank, something inside me had settled into stillness, the kind of quiet that comes not from peace but from certainty. I walked into the bank past the scent of printer paper and fresh coffee, and sat across from Carlos, the branch manager. He smiled warmly, not yet aware of the seismic shift unfolding between us. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Collins?" he asked, fingers poised above his keyboard. My voice was calm, steady, unbreakable. "I need to cancel a wire transfer." He blinked in surprise, tapping into my account. The $50 and $1,000 were at the Napa venue. He looked at me, then eyebrows raised as if searching my face for clues to this abrupt decision. "Yes," I replied simply. He hesitated, glancing at his screen, then back at me. "You're in luck. It hasn't processed yet." His tone softened. May I ask why I met his gaze without flinching? The overhead lights reflected in his glasses, turning his eyes into twin white squares. But I saw him clearly, and more importantly, I saw myself reflected there. A woman who had given everything, who was finally choosing to keep something back for herself. The circumstances have changed. I said, my voice quiet, but ringing with finality, as he nodded and began typing, canceling the transfer with a few clicks. I felt an unexpected warmth bloom in my chest. Not regret, not fear, but relief. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of her expectations lift from my shoulders, drifting away like fog, burned off by morning sun. And as I walked back to my car keys, clenched tightly in my fist, I felt taller, steadier, and fiercely alive, a woman who had finally remembered her worth. The door slammed against the wall so hard it rattled the picture frames, and Luke barged in without so much as a knock. His tie hung crooked around his neck, shirt-wrinkled hair pushed back with shaking fingers. His eyes were blazing wild with anger, and something else. Panic, perhaps, though. He'd never admit it. "Mom," he barked, voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "Why the hell aren't you answering your phone? Emily's losing her mind. She says you're refusing to pay the rest for the wedding." I didn't move. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, swirling the half glass of red wine in my hand. The ruby liquid caught the late afternoon sun pouring through the window, throwing streaks of blood-red light across the chipped oak tabletop. Outside, somewhere down the street, a dog barked, distant and unconcerned. Luke loomed over me, fists clenched tight by his sides, shoulders heaving with quick, angry breaths. "She says you're being difficult, that you're ruining everything." A laugh slipped from my lips, low and humorless, sharp enough to slice clean through the thick tension between us. It sounded foreign to my own ears. Difficult? I repeated softly, tasting the word on my tongue like spoiled fruit. My gaze met his, calm and unwavering. For not attending a wedding, I was uninvited from his jaw-tightened teeth grinding audibly. Andrew's parents are traditional, Mom. You know how they are. It's complicated. I raised an eyebrow, tilting my head slightly. My voice calm, as still water hiding ancient dangerous depths. Traditional. Luke, I've already paid $30,000. I was about to send $50,000 more. That's not tradition. That's a transaction. His eyes widened with shock, flickering with sudden calculation. Wait, you were sending another $50? Was I said, simply lifting the glass to my lips and taking a slow sip, letting the bitterness bloom across my tongue? Not anymore. For a fleeting second, panic flashed across his face, breaking through his anger like lightning splintering a storm-dark sky. But just as quickly it vanished, replaced by a deeper, uglier fury. Mom, they're counting on that. He snapped his voice, pitching high with desperation. The venue, the caterer, the deposits. Not my problem anymore, I interrupted, each syllable clipped and cold enough to freeze the air between us. He slammed his palms down on the table so hard the wine glass rattled, sending tiny ripples through the crimson liquid. Of course it's your problem. He shouted, eyes blazing. She's your daughter. I set the glass down deliberately, the faint click of crystal on wood echoing in the quiet kitchen. I leaned back in my chair, studying him with a gaze that was steady, unflinching. And I am her mother. I replied, each word weighted with decades of sacrifice and silent suffering. A mother who was told to stay home and watch her own child's wedding on a screen. His face twisted, contorting with disgust and disbelief. You always make everything about yourself, he spat. And right there in the fading golden light of my quiet kitchen, with the scent of warm wine and summer roses drifting through the open window, something inside me snapped. Not with rage or sorrow, but with a clarity so pure it felt almost like grace. I stood slowly, feeling the chair legs scrape against the worn tile floor. I met his eyes, unblinking, my voice low and lethal. Get out of my house, Luke. He blinked, stunned, his mouth falling open slightly. What get? Out, I repeated, each word falling like a stone into still water. I've spent my whole life giving until there was nothing left to give. I am done being the villain in a story I wrote with love. For a moment, he just stood there, mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a child caught in a lie he couldn't explain away. Then, with a sharp exhale, he turned on his heel and walked out the door, clicking shut behind him, with a soft finality that echoed louder than any slam. I stood there in the aftermath, the quiet humming around me like electricity. My pulse throbbed in my ears, waiting for guilt to come crashing down, to drown me in its familiar undertow, like it always did. But it didn't. Instead, what came was silence. Cold, calm, glorious silence that spread through my chest, like winter sunrise, seeping down my arms, curling into my fingertips, still gripping the stem of the wineglass. For the first time in my life, I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter or small or desperate to be forgiven. I was free. That night, my phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, each vibration echoing through the quiet dark like a moth trapped against glass, desperate for escape. 1:02 a.m. 1:17 a.m. 1:39 a.m. I didn't answer. I lay in bed, staring at the shadowed ceiling, listening to the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The distant bark of a neighbor's dog carried on the cool breeze, slipping through the open window. The world outside felt hushed, paused as if it too waited to see what I would do next. At 3:24 a.m., her final message came through its glow, lighting up the room for a brief, sharp moment. "Mom, please. I don't understand why you're doing this to me." I read it once, the words blurring slightly, as tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. Not tears of grief or regret, but of a bone-deep emptiness that pulsed with quiet ache. Not for what she said, but for how hollow it all sounded. She didn't understand. Of course she didn't. Emily had spent her entire life swimming effortlessly in the waters of my sacrifices, never once pausing to wonder who carried her to shore when the currents pulled her under. My love had always been the ocean beneath her feet, endless, unquestioned, taken for granted. By dawn, the sky glowed pale lavender and peach, and there were 47 missed calls lined up in neat, accusing rows across my screen. Emails flooded my inbox, each subject line screaming urgency louder than the last. Subject: urgent. Please respond. Mom, the venue called. The payment didn't go through. We're going to lose everything. Andrew's parents are furious. They said this proves they were right about you. Please don't do this. We can talk about you coming to the wedding, but we need the funds first. I read the words slowly, tasting their metallic sting as they sank deep into my chest like cold steel. We can talk about you coming, but we need the funds first. There it was, laid bare and ugly under the pale dawn light. No apology, no acknowledgement, no moment of reckoning for what she had done. Just a negotiation, a calculated bargain for my dignity in exchange for my money. A reminder that my worth was measured in bank transfers and clear checks, not in decades of unconditional love. I closed the email gently, breathing out a long, quiet exhale into the stillness of my kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, steam rising in slow curls filling the room with the comforting scent of fresh grounds. Sunlight spilled through the window, illuminating tiny dust motes, dancing in golden suspension, untouched by the turmoil that rippled beneath my skin. And in that fragile, silent moment, I felt something inside me settle with a finality that felt almost holy. For the first time in decades, I felt untouchable, like the surface of a frozen lake, cold, hard, and unbreakable. Later that afternoon, while reviewing contracts at my desk, Robert walked by and paused, his brow furrowing as he studied my face. "You all right, Margaret?" he asked softly, his voice carrying genuine concern. I looked up at him, blinking away the heaviness pressing against my temples. I said the words, tasting honest and clean on my tongue. For the first time, I really am. He studied me for a long moment, searching my eyes for the cracks that had always been there. Before then smiled gently, the lines at the corners of his mouth, deepening with quiet kindness. "Good," he said, nodding slightly. "You deserve that." At noon, another email came in longer than the rest, its paragraphs rambling between half-hearted apologies and barely concealed accusations. "Mom, I'm sorry if I made you feel uninvited. That wasn't my intention. But this is my wedding. I just wanted it to be perfect. Please don't ruin it. I need you. I need your help. Please don't abandon me now." I read it once, feeling the familiar rise of guilt flicker in my chest before fading away like smoke on a breeze. I closed the email without replying. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because in that moment I finally understood her desperation wasn't for me. It was for what I could give her. And I had nothing left to give, not because I was empty, but because I was finally choosing to save what remained for myself. That evening, as dusk bled across the Oregon sky, turning it a bruised lavender streaked with fading gold, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea. The ceramic mug was warm against my palms, grounding me in its simple, comforting heat. Birds settled into their nests, the hush of night descending in soft sighs through the trees. A neighbor's wind chimes tinkled faintly in the distance, their silver notes drifting like prayers across the quiet street. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool evening air, scented with lavender from the potted plant by my chair. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for her call. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to be chosen or forgiven or loved back into worth. Because in this quiet, aching freedom, I realized something she might never understand. When your love is only needed for what it gives, then your absence will teach louder than your presence ever could. And as night fell around me, wrapping the porch in its gentle darkness, I felt nothing but peace. Weeks blurred into each other, dissolving like watercolor, left out in the rain. The wedding came and went without me. A small backyard ceremony hastily arranged after the venue cancelled, with folding chairs set up on patchy grass and discount flowers draped over a plastic arch. Luke sent me a single photo via text. Emily in a white dress, her smile stretched thin eyes flickering with exhaustion beneath forced joy. Andrew's parents stood stiffly beside her, their expressions frozen in polite disapproval, as though the cheapness of it all offended them more than my absence ever could. There was no caption beneath the photo, no wish you were here, no soft apology, or bridge to span the silence between us. Just an image sent like proof of life, as if to say, "See, we did it without you." I stared at it for a long moment, tracing the familiar slope of her shoulders, the stubborn tilt of her chin I once kissed goodnight 1,000 times. Then slowly, deliberately, I pressed delete. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but because I refused to keep a moment that was never meant to include me, a moment I was expected to fund to bless from afar, and then erase myself before my presence made its surface crack. Days melted into weeks, and with each sunrise I felt layers of invisible weight peel away from my chest. I woke up not to accusations, disguised as questions, not to guilt-soaked messages demanding sacrifice, but to silence, to choice. Mornings became mine again. I would sit by the kitchen window, steam curling from my coffee, watching golden light spread across the sink, illuminating chipped porcelain and the tiny basil plant thriving on the sill. Outside, sparrows chattered in the rose bushes, darting between branches in small bursts of freedom that felt like hope. On Thursday nights, I joined a pottery class at the community center. The first time my hands pressed into cool, damp clay, I felt something shift deep inside a click of alignment I didn't know I'd been missing. As the wheels spun beneath my fingers, I felt decades of silent burdens slide off my shoulders and sink into the spinning clay. My instructor, a soft-spoken woman named Irene, taught me to let the clay guide me, rather than control it. Bowls formed beneath my touch mugs with thick lips, perfect for morning tea vases, slightly off-center but beautiful in their imperfect symmetry. For the first time in years, I created something that wasn't for anyone else. Just me. At work, Robert still brought me lattes with a swirl of cream and the faintest dusting of cinnamon. One bright Friday, he paused by my desk, holding out a small lavender plant wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "For your porch," he said softly, his voice carrying the warmth of early spring sun. "I thought it might like the morning light as much as you do." I looked up at him and smiled a real smile, unfiltered by exhaustion or forced politeness, feeling something bloom quiet and steady inside my chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was peace, the kind that doesn't ask you to bend yourself smaller or burn yourself empty, the kind that lets you exist as you are unhidden, unashamed. A month later, Emily emailed, a long rambling letter, half apology, half excuse. She wrote about how stressful wedding planning had been, about how Andrew's mother was impossible to please, about how you don't understand what it's like to juggle so many expectations. I read her words once, each sentence washing over me like rain on stone. Where guilt once clutched at my throat, there was only calm. Her words felt weightless, like scraps of paper adrift on a breeze I no longer stood beneath. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because my silence was no longer punishment, it was protection. It was a boundary drawn in quiet grace around the small blooming garden of my peace. Some mornings when dawn slips into my quiet house and bathes the hallway in soft gold, I still remember her as a little girl in strawberry pajamas, hair sticking up in wild tufts, as she ran down the hall calling for me with that sweet, sleepy urgency only children carry. That memory still hurts a sharp ache in a place that once bled endlessly. But pain doesn't own me anymore. It rises, it softens, it passes, leaving me whole. On a warm Saturday, I planted the lavender on my porch rail, pressing dark earth around its slender roots, as bees drifted lazily through its purple blooms. Sunlight spilled over the quiet street, gilding peeling fences and dandelion-strewn lawns in gentle gold. I sat back in my wicker chair, tea cooling in my palms, and let the world move around me without demanding anything in return. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mother defined by sacrifice. I didn't feel like a widow marked by absence. I didn't feel like a background character orbiting someone else's spotlight. I felt like me, just me. And for the first time, that was enough. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dawn's tender hush, the words sliding from my lips like a prayer to myself. I don't need to be chosen to be worthy. I don't need to be needed to be loved. I am here, and I am enough. As the breeze brushed against my face carrying lavender and morning sun, I realized something Emily may never understand. Freedom doesn't always explode with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it arrives softly, almost unnoticed, wrapped in silence, and the quiet, fierce power of finally choosing yourself. And as the wind chimes tinkled faint music into the warm morning air, I sat there breathing in the scent of lavender and earth, feeling my chest rise and fall in a rhythm that belonged only to me. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Emily would ever see me again beyond what I could give her, but I knew this for the first time. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I wasn't waiting to be forgiven. I wasn't waiting to be called home, because I had already come home to myself. The wedding at the Grand Napa venue was cancelled. All the floral contracts, catering deposits, and engraved invitations dissolved overnight, like sugar melting into black coffee. In the end, they scrambled for a backup plan, a small backyard ceremony thrown together under plastic arches draped with discount tulle and borrowed fairy lights that flickered weakly in the late afternoon gloom. Folding chairs sat crooked on patchy grass, and the Bluetooth speaker crackled through Emily's chosen processional song, tinny and distant. Margaret wasn't invited. This time she didn't need to be. The absence felt less like rejection and more like release. Days later, Emily's email arrived. Long, rambling, each paragraph spilling out excuses like an unspooled thread. Half apology, half justification. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. It was just so stressful. And Andrew's family. You don't understand how hard it was to plan everything perfectly. Margaret read it once, eyes skimming each carefully constructed explanation, noting how her daughter's words twisted around accountability, always slipping away before reaching the truth. Then she closed her laptop softly, as if not wanting to disturb the quiet blooming around her. She didn't reply, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because, for the first time in her life, silence felt like freedom, not punishment. Her silence was no longer a battlefield tactic. It was peace. It was choosing herself without needing permission. The next morning she woke before dawn, when the house still held the hushed blue darkness of almost night. No buzzing phone jolted her from sleep. No urgent, guilt-laced messages demanded she explain herself or pour out yet another part of her soul to soothe someone else's discomfort. No new